Hello everyone. Let's see if this is working. Yes, and I'm live. So that's amazing. So today's lesson is going to be about color mix, flesh tones part 2. Because we still have 2 minutes, we are not starting yet. I'm going to ask you to bear with me for another couple of minutes, okay? And then we will start the tutorial. Meanwhile, I'll be squeezing some colors out because the lesson needs to start at 7 p.m. sharp. We still have 2 minutes, okay? So I'm just going to squeeze a few colors and you can watch. Why not? Here's our lovely palette. And you can enjoy watching paint dry, which is like the dullest thing you can do. But I promise to entertain you a bit more once the lesson begins. So for those who are about to join me, I will start the lesson in 1 minute at 7 p.m. But I'm going to write down something for you. So we're just almost starting. I haven't taught anything yet, so don't worry, you haven't missed a thing. And all right. So the time has begun. Hello, everyone. Please let me know if you can hear me. You already know the trick. If you could click the like button or the wow, then I know you are listening to me. And today's lesson is going to be the continuation of color mixing for flesh tones. Like I've taught you last time, flesh is nothing more than a mix between browns, can be lighter or darker, perhaps a bit of red if there's more blood showing in certain parts of the body, and the color of melanin, which tends to be an orangey brown or even very dark brown, almost black. So it depends on your ethnicity. But today's lesson is going to dwell more into that, and I'm going to show you easier ways of achieving skin tones. Skin tones are very easy to do. I know that people say, oh, but it's very difficult, it's very difficult. It used to be difficult until you watched this lesson. The moment you watch this lesson, you're going to understand that flesh tones are very easy to do indeed. So, you are going to start by learning a very easy palette, which is called the Zorn Palette. And I've just learned right now that everything is inverted on my phone. Don't ask me why. So I wrote Zorn Palette for you to see. Anders Zorn, but it seems like it's upside down, isn't it? So I would like to spell it for you so you can research later. Zorn is spelled Z-O-R-N. Okay, he was a brilliant Swedish painter, one of the best painters in history, in my opinion, a fantastic artist, classically trained. And the Zorn palette is a little bit of a myth. So art schools, they believe and they teach their students that Anders Zorn, that was the name of that painter, he used this palette that consisted of only 4 colors: red, yellow ochre, black and white, which I'm going to show you right now. So as you can see in there, you've got the black, you've got the red, you've got the yellow ochre, and you have the white. And according to the myth, he painted all of those wonderful portraits by using only these 4 colors. Now, we know that's not true. Anders Zorn used many more pigments, but indeed, if you use this restrained palette, with these 4 colors, you can do over 90% of all the flesh tones that you need to do for a portrait. So you don't need to buy like 50 shades of brown to be able to paint a portrait. You can actually do a lot with just those 4 colors. So we're starting with the Zorn palette. I'm going to show you the vast array of colors that you can do. And that means let's start with pale tones first, all right? So here's the Zorn palette, and everything is upside down. So first things first, if you mix just a little bit of yellow ochre and white, you're going to get this pale yellow color. And of course, we're just starting with basics first, so you can see how to get started. Red and white definitely is going to give you very, very bright pink. You don't need such a bright pink for portraiture, generally speaking, if you want a realistic portrait. I'll show you what to do later with this color. And finally, just black and white is going to give you a bluish gray. Right, so these are the fundamentals of the Zorn palette. So you've got a kind of a muted primary yellow. So it's not primary, it's muted, it's a brown yellow. You've got a red, and you have a fake blue. So again, it's like having the 3 primary colors, but more muted. The fake blue is essentially the color. Let me just put some more light so you can see a bit better. So the fake blue is essentially the color that you are going to use to cool down your pigments. So it's going to be just like blue. You can see it here. You've got the red and you have the yellow. With these 3 colors, you can produce a vast array of mixes, which I'll show you later, just immediately after. Let me just bring some of this light down so you can see better. There you go. And there you go. Now you can see much better. The phone was projecting a shadow, so I'm just going to move this like this. Now next, now that we have a basic 3 pale colors, you can start mixing them in 2s. So for example, if you add a bit of pale yellow with a bit of red, you're going to get an orangey color. Let me just put a bit more in here. I'm being stingy. Don't know why. There you go. So you start getting an orangey shade, which is in between the yellow and the pink. And that orangey shade is more similar to the average tone of a lot of people's flesh tone. But because the color is still a little bit too bright, so you already know what to do, don't you? You are going to do what? How do you dull down the color? You can write in the comments, because I'm very curious to see if you're following me. So please write down in the comments below, how do you dull a color? You mix it with gray. So if you're going to mix a bit of gray into this color, we finally start getting some sort of flesh tone over there. So it's not as bright anymore, and it's going to be more natural looking color. All right? Now, let me go into a darker shade. And I'm just changing the angle here. Yes, so you can see better. There you go. Now let me go into a much, much darker shade. There. And now we're not going to mix any white pretty much. We're going to use this pure. Then you've got the yellow ochre mixed with some reds. It's going to give, like underneath, a more orangey tone, because yellow and red make orange. So this is an orangey tone. Then you've got the red, which again is way too bright to use in portraiture if you want a realistic portrait. And then finally, you're going to have a mid-gray. So let me take some of this in here. Just add a bit more white. All right, so with these mid colors in here, and I'm going to show them just a little bit nearer so you can see. With these mid colors in here, you are able to produce a vast array of intermixes. So again, the red is just way too bright. We're not going to use it pure. But what happens when you put just a little bit of red into some gray? You get a kind of a purple, which is not surprising because red and blue make purple. And as you know, this gray is bluish. So if the gray is bluish, it's going to give you a purplish shade when you mix it to the red. And what about when you mix gray and yellow? I'm going to take some of this gray and mix it with the yellow over there. And get ready for a surprise, okay? Because it's going to be a surprise for most of you. If you mix gray and yellow, you get a kind of... let me mix it better. You start getting a greenish color. And again, because yellow and blue make green. Let me just put a bit more ochre so you can see better the effect. There you go. So you start getting a kind of an olive green. It's a khaki shade. And a lot of people say that, oh, Annie, this is for you, if you're watching. You asked me about when you see blues and greens and all sorts of colors in the flesh. And in reality, all of these flesh tones that look like blue or green or something of that sort, they're actually very, very dull grays. And they are grays that are mixed with a bit of red or a bit of yellow. Do you understand? So the greens that you see, they're actually not greens in flesh tones. This is not green. It's a very, very muted yellow. So I'm going to show you again. And so that color you've seen in there, which is actually greenish, is nothing more than yellow and gray. Because, and this is something that I want you all to remember from now onwards, write it down if you have to. Gray is blue. I'll have to explain this again because before you think I lost it. Gray is usually bluish. If you just mix black and white, you get a bluish gray. If you get a bluish gray, that means you are adding blue when you use that gray to mix with a color. Does this make sense? That's how we made this fake purple. Again, let's have a look at the purple. This incredible purple that looks very, very violet was nothing more than an orangey red with that gray. And you got this almost magenta color in between. Of course, it's muted, it's grayish, but it's definitely violet. So, you really need to understand that most of the strange colors that you see on people's faces, they are not bright greens or bright blues, or no, they're grayish yellows, which makes the green. They are grayish reds, which makes these really strange violet colors. They are grayish orange. Does this make sense to you? And these gray tones will give you the diversity of shades that you see on the human flesh. And indeed, gray behaves like blue most of the times, and so does black, by the way. If you add black to a color, usually black behaves like a very, very dark purple blue. Again, depends on the black. Some blacks are brownish, but generally speaking, when you add black to a color, you are making it slightly bluer and violet, and of course darker. As long as you understand this, you will be able to paint with black. Okay? Black cools down a lot of colors, and so does white, by the way. When you add white to a color, usually you make it chalkier and slightly grayer. We will talk about white in a second. So let's look at our palette again. And I was just showing you how much you can do. You can even fake that there is violet, and you can even fake that there is green. There is no green in here. See the power of gray? The moment you add gray to colors, you start creating other colors. So an example, let's see what happens to this bright orange if you mix with some gray as well. Let me just quickly do some more gray because I was a bit stingy, as I usually am with paints. Okay, so now that we have gray, let's scoop some into here, and let's take some of this bright orange and mix with the gray. Now, you start producing a color that still looks very neutral to be a flesh tone. So let's add a bit more orange. Let's put a bit more of the yellow and a bit more of the red, and together they make orange. It's still a bit too reddish, so add a touch more yellow. And look how amazing. We're starting to get another skin tone, another flesh tone. And this flesh tone is definitely darker than my own skin of my hand. So my flesh tone, the real one I have, is like between those two. So this one is too light, the one underneath, and this one at the top is too dark. And if you mix some white with this flesh tone, you are going to produce a slightly lighter version. So let's lighten this up. And let's start seeing what happens in terms of color mixing. Okay. Now, you could go redder. Like some areas of my flesh are pinker, other areas are more yellow. You already know how to do it, so I'm going to make two shades here on the sides. One is going to be yellower. Just add some more white so it doesn't get... Okay. So, we are making a slightly yellower version of that color. Very nice. And then on the other side, I'm just going to clean my palette. On the other side, we're going to make it slightly redder. Let's take this brown again and mix it in there. Right, and now just to conclude, so you can start seeing this a bit better. I hope the image is sharp. Let's just blend those two a bit so we start getting a gradient. There you are. So, we just produced flesh tones that went from a very yellowish color all the way down into a pinker, redder tone. And they were all mixed with gray. Because if you don't mix gray, the color is just way too garish, and you don't want that to happen. So, if you understood this part of the lesson, I would like you all now to press, let's change buttons now. If you could press the heart button, then I understand that you got this part of the lesson. I can start seeing some hearts now. Any questions? It's time to ask now. Only questions about flesh tones, okay? Don't ask any question yet about anything else. I would like you to ask questions about flesh tones and let me follow the chat box so I can see what's happening with you. So, questions about flesh tones. How can we mix dark flesh tones, Raji? And how would it look under light and shadow? So, Raji, I'm going to deal with dark flesh tones in just 5 minutes. Bear with me for 5 minutes. I'm just doing now the very pale colors and the medium tones, and then I will go to the darker ones. Miguel, makes sense. Yes, it's a great day indeed. Heart button pressed. Thank you very much. And no more questions? Let me just read here all the comments. How can we mix? No, I only see... There's no questions actually, which is strange. I only see 5 questions. Maybe my chat is not showing everything. Now next we're going to move into the darker flesh tones. So last week I mentioned that it doesn't matter your ethnic background, it doesn't matter if you have pale skin or dark skin, every skin is a shade of orange. And they're exactly the same shade of orange, pretty much. It can be slightly yellower or slightly redder, but it's orange. From very, very, very pale flesh tones all the way down to super dark black skin. You can definitely do all the human shades with orange for flesh, okay? Remember, as we go paler, the grays start playing a bigger role. So you need this kind of slightly greenish or purplish colors. Okay, let's do it down here as well. I really want to show you in the pastel tones how you can make... so let's make a bit more of this very pale gray so we don't run out. And let's make a mix now with some pink. So the gray and the pink are going to mix together. And there you are. So again, you have a kind of a purplish tone. The gray behaves like blue, I repeat. So the pink got purpler because it was mixed with a bluish gray. Black and white make bluish gray. This is something I need you to realize once for all and forever. So black and white make bluish gray, they don't make gray. Now next, let's make a bit more pale gray again, because I need to show you what happens when you mix yellow ochre. So let's bring a bit of yellow ochre and a bit of white. This is starting to get a bit dirty, but that's okay. And again, you already know what's going to happen. You already know what's going to happen. It's going to start turning greenish. So let's put just a little bit more yellow so the color is a bit more visible, so it reads better. Okay. So it's very important that you learn once for all that all the different colors that we see, from greenish to purplish, they're illusion. They're essentially just muted shades of yellow ochre or red or gray. All right? So I think now you understood this. And I would like everything to be very clear. So if you have more questions, please ask them now. And heart button, okay, so no more questions. I'm going to close this chapter of the paler skin tones for now. So last chance, please write down if you have any question about paler flesh tones. Nobody has questions? So I'm going to move now into the darker flesh tones. So, as we go darker on our Zorn palette, we're going to start playing more and more with just those 3 and less with the white. So for example, what happens when you mix orange, red and black? Let me just clean my palette again, because it's getting really... So I'm going to make an even darker shade above. Now we're going to start with red and very, very dark gray. And again, you get the really glowing violet. I mean, it's unbelievable. I don't know if your computer can show this to you, but this is like a super, super glowing violet color. Incredibly purple. And then, how are we going to mix this into a human flesh tone? Not just with that color. What's the opposite color of purple? Yellow. So in order to remove that purple cast, we need to add some yellow. That's what we're going to do right now. And now, yes, we're starting to get a more convincing flesh tone. Okay? So this color is going to be much more flesh-like. And so Raji, I think you missed the beginning of the lesson, but the green veins under the flesh, it's not green. It's actually muted yellow. So if you mix yellow ochre and gray, you get the illusion of green. There is no green veins. It's an optical illusion. And the reason why we see green, it's an illusion. But of course that if you're painting in a more expressionistic way, you can create all sorts of colors. I mean, you can use bright greens, bright blues, etc. I'm not dealing with that now. I'm just talking about realistic painting. There is no green on the human flesh. It's an illusion. It's a very muted yellow. So muted yellow makes this greenish gray. And then when it's surrounded by orange and other colors, it reads as a positive green. But that's an illusion, okay, Raji? So don't forget that. And black and white make bluish gray. Remember forever. Thanks, Helen. Yes, that's something to remember forever. Now we are going into darker flesh tones. And of course that this tone we've made over here, we can darken it even more. So let's put just a little bit of black, because this black is very, very strong. And now we get a darker color, but it's very grayish. It's actually very grayish. It doesn't look like flesh yet, because dark flesh tone is not so gray. It cannot contain so much white. Remember, there was white on that mix, but a darker flesh tone is not whitish. So what we're going to do is we're going to mix red and black together, and that will give you a much more realistic, darker flesh skin. Does that make sense? Let me put here on the side just red and black. And you have like a really nice, beautiful dark brown, which is very reddish. And this is more of a flesh tone. If you compare it to the one that had a little bit of white, the one with white looks gray by comparison. So the next thing I would like you to learn is that white, it's a killer of dark tones. It makes sense because white is one of those, white is the lightest color that we have. So if you're trying to mix dark colors, it doesn't make much sense to actually add white to your dark colors. You end up with gray, you know? So if you're doing super dark flesh tone and you don't want it to be grayish, because usually it's not grayish, you know? Usually it's a proper brown color, then you only want to mix your red and your black. Red and black together gives a positive brown, a super dark brown color. And then of course you can tweak it, because no two people are alike. There's always some variations and some differences. Some bits are a little bit, you know, some bits might be yellower, other bits will be redder, other bits will be grayer, but nothing else. Flesh is always between yellowish, reddish, or grayish. Nothing else. There's no greens, there's no blues. I repeat, for those who just entered the lesson now, there are no greens and no blues on the flesh. All of these greens and blues are optical illusions. They're just grayish yellows, or grayish pinks, or grayish grays. Does this make sense? So Angela asked a question, which, let me just update the questions. There is very so cosmetically, to correct high pigmentation on dark skin, you could use a concealer with an orange red tone. Yes, but not just for dark skin, you know, Angela. This applies to how can I explain this? You and I a person from the North Pole or a person from the tropics, from the equator, they have exactly the same flesh color. The only thing that changes is the lightness or darkness. But it's exactly the same flesh color. It's always, always, always brown. Pale brown or dark brown, but it's the same shade of brown. Of course, with little variations, you know, it can be a bit cooler or a bit warmer, depending on the person. But it's exactly the same color. And what's the color of humans? The color of humans is indeed an orange. We are all a shade of orange. Medium Mediterranean skin like myself, we are grayish orange. Someone from Ghana, for example, would be a very dark orange, still orange, okay? Someone from North Sweden or Russia would be a very, very pale orange, but it's always orange. So we are exactly the same color, all right? We are exactly the same hue, if you prefer. Let's be more specific. We all have the same hue. It's just some people are slightly yellower, some people are slightly redder, but it's always orange, okay? Does this make sense? So, like I was, what, João? The skin of the Cookie Monster? I don't remember, actually. The Cookie Monster, I can't recall the color of the skin. So, from very pale to very dark, all of these colors were produced always with yellow, red, black and white. Nothing else. Because we are all the same color. We are all the same hue. We are all orange. Alright? Because brown is a shade of orange. If you mix orange and black, you get brown. Does this make sense? So if you add pink to gray, won't you have white in the red to make the pink? Yes, you need the white in the red to make the pink, but if you're talking about super dark skin tones, and maybe you were so Elena, I don't know if you listened to the beginning of the lesson. I was first dealing with super pale flesh tones, and those have white, of course, because it's very pale. But as you go darker, so now we are finally in the tropics. We are dealing with dark skin. You avoid white. Because the moment you mix white with a dark color, you get gray. And that's a massive problem. If you're painting black skin, for example, you don't want to mix white with your browns, unless you are painting the paler parts of the flesh. So, for example, the palms of the hands will be very pale. We're talking an average color of the back of the hand. So it's going to be a super dark color. Does this make sense to everybody? So, this is very similar to a workshop that I taught at the Saatchi Gallery about 2 years ago, which was color mixing. And I want to remind you again from last week. So last week's lesson, we spoke of Mansell and how color is actually totally scientific. This is mathematics. Color is not something magical that you produce out of the blue, being blue a color already. So out of the blue, you can only make blue, shades of blue. No, color is like mathematics. And the moment you start understanding color, mathematically speaking, you will be able to mix any color in the world, all of them, without exception. Okay? So I'm going to bring you now the Mansell book again, so you can see it. Let me remove my Zorn palette, which was just painted on a little bit of cards, you know, from a parcel. There's no need to be wasting canvas with just a quick color demonstration. So we are going back again to the Mansell Book of Color. And this Mansell Book of Color, if you missed last week's lesson, I would like you to listen to it. It's on YouTube as well. So if you search for my name, Nelson Ferreira, Art Classes on YouTube, you are going to find lots of videos. I really think it's best if you all subscribe to that channel, because as soon as these lessons end, they migrate to YouTube, and then that means you don't miss a thing. So please subscribe to my YouTube channel, and then you can listen to all the lessons, including the ones you have missed for some reason. For example, Boris was giving a speech today, so I think a lot of people were on TV, and now, now if you want to hear the beginning of the lesson, you will be able to find it on YouTube after a couple of hours. So let me open the Munsell book of color. And, oh, it's upside down. And, like I just discovered, the thing with cameras is that it's very hard to show you. So, never forget, flesh tones are always here. Always. Without exception. They are orange. But it's orange that is mixed with different shades of light or dark. And different quantities of gray. So if you realize that in color mixing there's only three reasons why your color is wrong. It's either too light or too dark, okay? And that's the most important of all. So if you want really good color in painting, your number one criteria, number one, without exception, is always the lightness and the darkness of colors. If you paint light colors light, medium colors medium, and dark colors dark, you are going to achieve a very high quality rendering. So don't make things upside down. So for example, a lot of people add white to the shadow colors. Look at my chin. So for example, the shadow under here has no white whatsoever. The moment you add white to a dark color, you kill the effect of shadow. You kill the effect of darkness. Does this make sense? So number one criteria, the lightness or the darkness of the color you are mixing. Get it right. Number two criteria is how vivid or how grayish it should be. Did you get this? So number one, is it a light color, a medium, or a dark? Get your answer before you start mixing colors. Huh? Understand color first. Question number two, is it a vivid color or is it muted? If it's not garish, if it's not super fluorescent, then it means it's muted. For sure it contains gray. For sure. I don't know if you realize, please look around you, to your room, wherever you are, just look around and count how many fluorescent colors do you see. You know, they glow. Like how many super fluorescent colors do you see? Not many. I'm looking around, I only see about 2 or 3 objects that have really bright, vivid colors. Everything else is more muted. So I don't know if you realized it or not. It's time to realize now. That's why you're having art lessons. Muted colors have gray. So if you are painting the colors of reality, you need to add a lot of gray to your color mixes. Otherwise they look too garish. They look way too fluorescent. All right? You got it? So next, you've got the opposite colors, like I mentioned last week. So we're not going to spend time with this. You can always watch the video later. And let's jump into flesh tones. So remember, whenever, I'm just going to move the camera there. Whenever you have a color that is too light or too dark, correct that first. So the number one thing you need to correct is always, if a color looks too light, please darken it. If a color looks too dark, please lighten it. This is the number one criteria of getting right colors. And observe this, because the Munsell color chart shows all the possible colors that are that the human eye can see in this hue. So in this case, it's a yellowish orange. You cannot see more colors than this. I mean, you can see in betweens, you know, where the colors jump, there is a middle tone there. But the Munsell book of color doesn't have to reproduce all the colors we could see. Otherwise, it would be a million tones. What matters is that you understand there's only 3 dimensions of color. Dimension number 1 is hue. It's the least important. So is this an orange or a green or a red? That's not very important for color mixing. Dimension number 2, the most important, is it light or dark? Look, if you paint your light and dark correctly, you can use any color you want. You can even do blue portraits like Picasso did. You got me? So as long as you paint the correct light and darkness, your paintings look good. And finally, the last dimension of color is how vivid, how bright a color is, or how dull. Okay? So this column right here is very grayish, and as you move to this side, the colors look brighter and brighter and brighter. And there's no other way around. So essentially, any color that you decide to paint, it's only about light and dark, and then is it grayish or not? If it is, mix it with gray, and don't worry about the hue. The hue is not really... in classical painting technique, we say that the values of light and dark is about 70% of the success of a painting. Sorry, 80%. So 80% of the success of a painting is about the values of light and dark. And then chroma, which is the saturation, you know, how vivid a color is or how dull, is about 19% of the success of a painting. And finally, hue is the bit that says, is this orange or green or blue? It's worth 1%, not more. So you don't need to worry with hue, generally speaking. When you are painting, get your values right. Light colors must be light and luminous. Dark colors must be dark and mysterious. Not the other way around. You don't want your light colors to be dirty and muddy and darkened, you know, dirty. And you don't want your dark colors to be chalky because they have too much white. That doesn't make any sense. So you want dark to be dark and light to be light. Okay? So I'm just going to jump into the query questions and answers. And I'll put the Munsell book there. So just remember, this was a very quick tutorial on how to mix flesh tones just by using the Zorn palette. Anders Zorn, that's what's written in there, although it's upside down in this camera. Don't ask me why. Cameras do this type of things. So questions and answers about flesh tones. And so Raji, there are only 3 factors. Yes, value of light and dark, saturation, which, by the way, don't call it saturation, call it chroma. It's more correct. The correct word is chroma because it's a pigment. So saturation is chroma. And finally, hue, indeed. And hue is not very important. Let me just check if there's any more questions. Now, if you got this bit, if you understood this part of the lesson, I would like you to press now, let's do the heart key, so I know. And I'm going to see if anyone didn't press the heart key, which might mean there are more questions about this. Someone is laughing. No laughters, please, unless you really hate the lesson. I would like you to to see if there's... so there's some hearts, but I think some people still have questions because I still see a lot of emoticons from different kinds. Now, I want to make a little something. When I taught that course at the Saatchi Gallery, so it was the Munsell color mix, it was very important for students to understand that all the colors that you are mixing only and only obey to those 3 rules I just told you. Only 3 things. It's easy. All right? So let's start. How would you mix the color of my shirt? I would like you all to answer now the 3 questions, okay? The color of my shirt, is it light, is it dark, or is it medium? All right? I want to see answers. The color of my shirt, in general, the average color. I'm not talking shadows. I'm not talking bright reflections. I'm talking the local color. Is it light? Is it medium? Or is it very dark? I don't see any answers. You are not very responsive today. Okay, I see a lot of medium. Very good. Aha. So you already know that whichever color you're trying to match, the color of my shirt, you don't add too much white or too much black. Does that make sense? It's a medium color. Now, question number 2. Is it a bright, vivid color, day glow, fluorescent? Or is it muted? Or is it in between? So I'll ask the question again. Is it a super garish color? Is it very gray? Or is it in between? Grayish but not gray, bright but not garish? I can see everyone is answering medium as well. Very good. And now finally the last question, the easiest. What color is this from the colors of the spectrum? Is it yellow? Is it orange? Is it green? Is it blue? I would like you to answer. So, and how muted? Because I see a lot of people are writing muted. Is this color very gray? Or it's only a little bit gray? Does that make sense? So it's in between, yes. And finally, that last question. Yes, the internet is delayed. That's why I only get your answers about 15 seconds later. Actually, you are being responsive after all. Thank you. I thought you were all ignoring me. And finally, what is the color of the... You are right, Emilio. It's a bit muted, but it's not totally gray. So to mix this color, you add a little bit of gray. But you add a bit of gray to which shade? Huh? What hue is this? Is this green? Is this blue? Or is it orange? Aha, I can start. Brilliant. And now everyone knows how to mix this color. It's going to be orange with a little bit of gray, and the gray should not be too light nor too dark. And that's how you mix this color. Does it make sense? So any color in the universe can be mixed just by keeping those 3 questions at bay. Question number 1, write it down, otherwise you won't remember, or watch this video again when you complete when we complete the session. Question number 1, is it a super light, a super dark, or a medium color? You need to answer that before you attempt mixing the color. Question number 2, is it a garish color, super fluorescent, or is it very gray, or is it somewhere in the middle? So a normal color, so to speak. If a color looks normal, it doesn't look too bright or too dull, that means it only has a little bit of gray mixed with it, but it still has gray, okay? And finally, last but not least, what's the hue? Is it blue or red or purple or green or orange, you know? And you know how to mix the color. Makes sense, huh? Now, I'm just going to show you one more thing, and I'll be quick. I'm just going to show you one more thing, which is last week. So Elena, you asked me if in order to produce neutral grays, if you could use umber. Umber is this type of color, so it's very, very dark brown. So colors like burnt umber or raw umber, if you can use them to produce neutral grays. The answer is yes and no, maybe. So umber just by itself, if you mix it with white, it will make a brownish gray. But you already know that black and white alone make a bluish gray. So if you mix the 3, you get a neutral gray. So I will demonstrate now how to make neutral gray. Remember last week I told you that if you mix Roman Black by Rublev, which is this American brand, so Roman Black mixed with lead white, so this is lead white, those two together give a neutral gray. It's not going to be bluish nor brownish. But if you don't have these paints in here, I will still show you how to mix a neutral gray. It's very simple. So let's look back into our luxurious palette, the piece of cards. And in order to produce neutral gray, you need some brown. So I'm going to put in here, this one is a natural amber color. Then you need white. And what you start getting when you mix those is a brownish gray. Let's make even one shade darker as well in here. Okay. So this is brownish gray. And then on the side, I'm going to do exactly the same with black and white. So let's take the white. Let's take a bit of black. So as you can see, black and white make that bluish gray I told you about, is super blue. And then just one tone here in the middle in between. Okay. So neutral gray is essentially a mix of the two. Let's add the bluish gray to the brownish gray. And when you mix them together, let me just add a bit more brown. When you mix them together, you start getting a color that is more neutral than any of those two by themselves. Does this make sense? So when you mix the brown and blue, they cancel each other out. And why does brown and blue cancel each other out? Think of the opposite colors. What is brown? You already know that brown is a shade of orange. Isn't that right? Orange and black makes brown. So orange and blue, they're opposite colors on the color wheel. So brown and blue are also opposite colors in the color wheel. They cancel each other out. Does that make sense? Because brown is nothing more than orange. It's just a very dark orange. So I'm going to show you now back to the mix we were doing in here. So if you add the bluish gray to the brownish gray and you mix them in here, you start getting a neutral gray. That it's not brownish, neither bluish. And finally, with the last tone, the palest of all, we can do exactly the same. Let's take some blue gray and mix it to the brown gray. Oh, the blue took over. Let me just take some more of this brown gray. Okay, there we are. It's still quite bluish because the blue took over, and I've been very stingy, which means I didn't mix enough paint. But this is more muted. This is grayer than any of those two just by themselves. Does this make sense? So you can always produce neutral grays by mixing a warm gray with a cool gray. So a bluish gray, which is black and white, mixed with a brown gray, which is, for example, burnt umber and white, they tend to cancel each other out. If you want to save time and just be easier on that, you can just buy that Roman black from Rubliev and also lead white. A quick mention of the toxicity of lead white. I did talk about this last week, but I will mention again. Lead white is toxic, so you cannot eat it. You cannot cut yourselves and then rub paint onto your wounds, okay? Don't eat your paints. Don't sniff them. Don't rub them all over your body, because a lot of colors can be toxic, especially if you eat them, if you ingest them, or if you breathe them, if they are a powder. The moment paint is paint and it's not a powder, you cannot breathe it anymore. So it's not toxic. You can paint and that's fine. But the paint in your hands, make sure you avoid it, and wash your hands. You know, just be hygienic. If you are hygienic, you will never have problems with the toxicity of certain colors. The problem is that a lot of people just are not aware that they're rubbing paint all over their hands, and then they go and eat an apple. They are eating the paint, you know. So make sure you don't paint with your fingers. Make sure you can put gloves on if you want. If you're really messy, you can put gloves on. But generally speaking, just paint with your brush or with your palette knife, okay? Not with your hands. We're not dabbing with paint. So lead white, like I was telling you, can be bought through Rublev. There's also a Portuguese brand that ships to Europe. They also sell lead white. It's D'Artecor, the brand I mentioned to you last week. And why is lead white so important? It's when you paint with lead white, it's guaranteed that your paintings will not crack. This is beautiful. I will repeat. Lead white is arguably the very best pigment that was ever invented for oil painting technique. A lot of colors will tend to crack or fade or whatever. Lead doesn't. So lead white is one of the... It's perhaps the #1 secret why the old masters' paintings are in such a beautiful state of preservation. Reason #1 is because they painted usually on rigid grounds, on panels, not on flexible, bouncy canvases, because as the canvas bounces and gets old and sags, paint cracks. So it's very important to paint on a rigid panel. But reason #2 why old masters' paintings are so incredibly preserved is because of lead white. And that's why artists like myself, I still paint with lead white, although it's toxic, because I don't eat it, so it doesn't matter. All right? Personally, I like to mix 30% titanium white with 70% lead white. Why? Because the 70% lead white will give that durability that I was telling you about, but the 30% titanium white will make the white a bit whiter, because titanium white is brighter than lead white. Lead white is more like off-white. It's like pearl, you know. So I mix with titanium white, and also because titanium white is opaque. Lead white is semi-transparent. So I like my paints to have density, especially on the first layers. I mix with some titanium white to make sure that the paint covers, you know, that covers the canvas. And then once the painting is completed, I can rest assured that the lead white content will preserve the painting. Does this make any sense? So if you have any other questions, I think now it's time to ask. I just want to give an announcement. I also teach exactly the same lesson at 8:30 p.m. UK time, but in Portuguese. So if you have friends that speak Portuguese, either Brazilians from Angola, Mozambique, continental Portugal, the islands of Portugal, Macau, East Timor, you know, Cape Verde, Saint Tome, Guinea. So if you have people that speak Portuguese, please tag them in these videos and let them know that at 8:30 p.m. on my wall there will be exactly the same tutorial but in Portuguese. Please spread the word, okay? Maybe you can tag them now in this video on the comments section, and then write lesson in Portuguese at 8:30 p.m. All right, so your friends know that it's coming. So I would like to pretty much leave you with this. I've got a question here. So Adeline, would you use opaque paint for portraits? Knee transparent paint? I presume knee is not, yeah? Not transparent paint. So Adeline, and by the way, thanks for putting a question mark, because sometimes I get question marks that are in affirmations, or I get questions without a question mark, and then I don't understand the difference. So Adeline, answering your question, it doesn't matter if you paint opaquely or transparently in layers, as long as you hit the right color. Because I have a lot of practice, I like to go straight to opaque so I can quickly build up the painting. You know, like in 1 hour, 2 hours, the painting looks pretty much almost done. And then, yes, and then I will go on top with more transparent layers to just tweak things slightly. And also because, as you know from the art classes, again, art classes at the Saatchi Gallery, we cannot really achieve every effect just with opaque paints or just with transparent paints. We need both. So some color effects need transparency, you know, they're crying for transparency, and other color effects, they're better done opaquely. Generally speaking, for portrait skin, you can go full opaque. Why? Because nothing in the skin, nothing in the flesh is super chromatic. Nothing in the flesh is super colorful. All the colors are muted. So that means you can definitely mix any color of flesh tone by using just opaque paints. What's the advantage of using transparent paints? There are several. First of all, students understand better how color layers and how each layer affects the previous layer. So when you're learning how to paint, I tend to use an indirect painting method for my students to layer because they have more control. Each layer is not as shockingly, how would you say, it's not too obtrusive, if that makes any sense. Because the layers are subtle, that means the student can gradually color in the painting. But also another reason why I like to use transparency is because you get much more subtle shifts in color, which are very, very hard to do with opaque paint. So generally, I think super opaque paints are better if you already have some experience, if that makes any sense. Now, I've got a few questions in here. Thanks, Napoleon. I've got a few questions in here. Can you remind me again the name you wrote on the top of the 3 skin tone colors? So, Miguel, it's Zorn, but it's upside down. My camera is inverting the image. Z-O-R-N. Remember, guys, you can always watch this video after it's completed. But I've got another questions here. Which I can't access at the moment. But I will get back to you as soon as I can with all the answers. Yes, Zorn, Z-O-R-N. Thanks, Helen. And I saw somebody asked me before, but I didn't have time to read who it was. But somebody asked if lead white can be delivered to the UK. And the answer is yes, of course it is. It's a myth that lead white was forbidden by the European Union. That's just not true. What the European Union did, and did very well, was to remove lead white from normal shops so that children don't buy it, for example. So lead white, nowadays, you have to be an adult to buy it, and sometimes you have to prove that you are a professional artist or a restorer. So there are some companies in the UK that sell lead white. I believe supremepaint.co.uk or Supreme Paint, one of those two, they will sell lead white from Rublev, that brand that I really like. And also my other favorite brand, Dartecor, D-A-R-T-E-C-O-R, they also ship worldwide. And because the paints are made in Portugal, it's very easy to ship them across the European Union. The UK is still kind of in the European Union, so if I were you, I would grab now a few tubes from Dartecor, because we don't know what the future holds, you know, in terms of importing those colors. So if you have... I just would like to say one more thing, which is I teach in London, and I miss a lot of people and a lot of students from Chiswick Park, from Grosvenor, Bank of America, Saatchi Gallery, National Portrait Gallery, Victoria and Albert Museum, McFarland's. So if you have the Linen Hall in Regent Street, you know, if you have friends that work in these places, please share this video with them, because it would be great to be in touch with everyone. For example, in Chiswick Park, you have Paramount Pictures, you have Discovery Channel. I have students for all these companies, and I miss dearly being in touch with everybody. Some people I have their contact, other people I don't. So I would be very grateful if you could share this video with people that work at the companies I've just told you. You know, I would love to stay in touch with everybody during the quarantine so they can watch these videos. And I'm going to leave you now with an introduction to the Zorn Palette. Next week... Oh, one thing. Please type now on the questions and answers. Please type questions that you would like to see as a subject for the next lesson. Next week, I'm going to insist, if you don't mind, next week is going to be drawing. I want to teach you how to draw, because without drawing you can't really go far, okay? So next week's lesson is going to be drawing technique. We will not mention anymore the charming, beautiful world of color. That's going to be forbidden. And we are just going to deal with drawing technique, including the bark drawings, which I'll show you what it is next week. If you don't know what's a bark drawing, it's spelled B-A-R-G-U-E, but next week we will deal with that. So essentially, write down the questions on the comments section. Also tag every friend that works in those companies I told you, you know, so the National Portrait Gallery, the Saatchi Gallery, Bank of America, McFarlane's, Linen Hall, you know, Grosvenor. Just tag them now, because I would love to be in touch with everybody, and most of them are not on my Facebook. And if you have a skin, I've got a question here. Building up light and dark on solids. Yes, very good. You know, Ian, the bark drawings deal with that. They deal with the build-up of light and dark in solid shapes. So it doesn't really matter. You can always, you know, do that through the bark drawings. The color, yes. So next week is going to be drawing with charcoal. Indeed, Raji, we are going to be drawing with charcoal. The bark drawings should be done with charcoal. For example, I just ran a workshop 2 months ago. It was bark drawings, and it was for the Museum of Contemporary Art of Lisbon, MNAC. And we didn't use charcoal, we used pencil. And the reason is because charcoal tends to be very messy when you have a limited amount of time to teach how to draw with bark methods. So I used pencil because it was better for beginners. But after you do a bark drawing with pencil, it's highly recommended that you do it with charcoal. You learn much more by manipulating charcoal than you do by manipulating pencil. First of all, we are used to pencils, so it's less of a challenge. And secondly, charcoal drawings allow you a much wider gamut of tones, you know, from light to dark. You have much more colors that you can do when you work with charcoal. The blacks are blacker, that's what I mean. So thanks very much to everybody. I'm looking forward to seeing you next week at the same time. So every Sunday at 7 p.m. UK time, lessons in English. And then every Sunday at 8:30 p.m. Lisbon time, UK time is the same, lessons in Portuguese. If you have Portuguese-speaking friends, please tag them now, okay? I'll have to hang up, unfortunately, because in 20 minutes' time, I will be starting the lesson in Portuguese. Please share the news. Tell all your Portuguese-speaking friends, including from Brazil, Mozambique, Angola, all those countries, that the lesson is starting in exactly 23 minutes, all right? At 8:30. Bye, everybody, and I will get back to you. I will read the comments, and then I'll try to reply to everybody. Take care. Bye-bye. Ciao.